Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are stepping right into the ring for honestly the ultimate intellectual heavyweight rivalry. We're talking about the centuries-old battle between the mind and the senses. Before we all just blindly accept modern science as absolute, unshakable truth, we kind of need to take a step back and explore the absolutely fascinating field of epistemology. So get ready to challenge literally everything you think you know. So start with this. What is real? And how do you actually know it? I mean, it sounds super simple on the surface, right? But really think about it for a second. This isn't just some late-night dorm room thought experiment. It is literally the foundation of all human discovery. If you believe there's a physical reality out there, you've got to ask yourself what exists in the first place. And then, this is the crucial part, how you can possibly access the truth of it. All right, here's our roadmap for the day. First, we'll hit reality and knowing it. Then we'll dive into rationalism, the innate mind, compare that with empiricism, the blank slate, move on to Galileo's moderate middle ground, and finally wrap the whole thing up with modern constructive empiricism. Okay, let's just dive right into section 1, reality and knowing it, setting the philosophical stage. So, there are two deeply important questions you've got to answer before claiming to know anything at all. The first one deals with the very nature of reality itself, like what actually exists out there. The philosophical field that tackles this is called ontology. It's the study of being. Basically, before we can measure or observe a single thing, ontology asks us to figure out what fundamentally exists in the universe. It's all about the what. And that brings us to our second question, which is really the absolute core focus of our explainer today. Assuming a reality actually exists out there, how in the world do we access and obtain knowledge of it? Well, this is epistemology. It's the study or the theory of knowledge itself. It's the how. So let's take a look at the two most important views on how we actually get our hands on that knowledge. Which brings us to section 2, rationalism, the innate mind, knowing without experiencing. First up in the ring, we've got the rationalists. These guys argue that knowledge is gained primarily through reason, period. They believe that by simply using our mind's incredible capability for logical thought, things like doing pure mathematics, we can deduce absolute truths about the world. And the absolute kicker here, they believe we can do this without ever relying on our senses. No seeing, no touching. Think of heavyweights like Plato or Descartes. They championed this idea, and they coupled it with a really wild concept about how nature is structured.
Because for rationalists, abstract concepts aren't something you learn. They're innate. We are literally born with them. Since these truths are already locked deep inside our minds from day one, we don't need to go out and observe them in the dirt. We just have to use pure reasoning to essentially remember or recognize them. It's like having a universal cheat sheet pre-installed in your brain.
Now for the other side of the coin. Section 3, empiricism, the blank slate, knowledge through the senses. So empiricism violently opposes the rationalist view. It turns it completely upside down. While rationalists are relying on this innate mind and pure logic, empiricists step up and argue that sensory experience isn't just some helpful little tool, it is the absolute most important way to obtain knowledge about the world. In fact, for the really strict empiricists, physically feeling, seeing, and hearing the world is literally the only path to obtaining true knowledge. No senses, no science. And you can trace this right back to Aristotle, who's widely considered the very first empiricist. He completely threw out that whole innate ideas thing. He actually coined the term tabula rasa. That means we are born as a completely blank slate. There are no hidden math equations or universal truths floating around in our heads at birth. When we're born, our minds are perfectly open, completely empty, just waiting for our senses to start writing the story of reality. All right, moving on to section 4, Galileo's moderate middle ground, bridging observation and logic. Now, Galileo is the perfect example of how this extremely strict rivalry eventually evolved into a brilliant compromise. He famously declared that the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. Basically, he took Aristotle's foundational empiricism and confidently mixed pure, logical, rational thought right back into the recipe. He became what we call a moderate empiricist. He just beautifully merged these two warring factions. On one hand, he put a massive emphasis on physical observation and real-world experimentation. But on the other, he happily relied on pure, hypothetical thought experiments. And most importantly, this was a real game changer. He wasn't afraid to include unobservable concepts into his hypotheses. Things we can't directly see with our own eyes, like invisible forces or gravity. He successfully bridged that massive gap between the physical eye and the rational mind.
But history is funny, and after Galileo, the pendulum swung wildly back and forth. You had later empiricists like Bacon and Hume who became incredibly strict again. Then, by the Third Era, this group called the logical positivists pushed empiricism to the absolute extreme. They basically put their foot down and said, only direct sensory experience leads to knowledge, period. If you couldn't directly see or touch a concept, they considered it completely, literally meaningless, which, is a bit intense. But that leads us right to our modern approach today.
Let's check out Section 5, Modern Constructive Empiricism. This is Van Frossen's contemporary flavor. So Bas van Frossen's constructive empiricism is our highly elegant modern compromise. It absolutely emphasizes sensory experience in our scientific methods, for sure. But unlike those ultra-strict logical positivists, it actively allows for theoretical terms that we can't physically observe. The whole goal here is to create empirically adequate explanations, meaning we accept these scientific models as true, but crucially, only as far as the observables actually go. So what about all that invisible stuff we can't see? The unobservables? Well, constructive empiricists say we simply can't determine their absolute truth, and they're perfectly fine with that. This view beautifully recognizes that all human knowledge is inherently provisional. Guys, this is exactly how modern science works today. We hold on to what works right now, fully 100% aware that new, contradictory evidence could totally shatter our understanding tomorrow. Which brings us to a really lingering final thought. Based on absolutely everything we've explored about epistemology today, I mean, from the innate ideas of rationalism to the completely blank slates of empiricism, all the way to modern constructive empiricism. If all knowledge is truly provisional and new evidence could completely rewrite the rules tomorrow morning, do you truly know anything for certain? Definitely something to think about the next time you claim something as an absolute fact. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next explainer.